So pursuing 50. This is a project that I take on with some reluctance. As I said in my first blog post about the whole thing, there's a very high probability of perception of failure. To me, I'm not that concerned with it. As far as actually hitting the number goes, the thing that I'm more concerned with is just putting in an honest effort, really trying to put myself behind the quest and sort of take you guys all along with me. Like I said in that post also, I'm not the big bass surfcaster that there is. But I do think I'm one of the guys that can talk about it, and I can write about it, and I can share my experiences with it, maybe better than some of the guys that I consider to be some of the best surf fishermen, some of the best guys that get the biggest fish every year. I have a pretty good formula. I have a certain way that I kind of go through my year. It's a little bit different for each season, and I've been pretty successful over my last how long have I been doing this now? Let's just say over the last 12 to 15 years. I've been lucky. I've done pretty well. I've put a lot of time in. I've poured myself into it. And so what I want to talk about today is this thing that I call Coleman's Law. It's sort of a golden rule type of a thing, and it came from an article that I read by Tim Coleman. For those of you who don't know who Tim Coleman was, he's no longer with us. He was the original editor of the New England Fisherman magazine. He was somebody who I sort of considered to be a friend, even though I never actually met him in person. But he used to call me periodically. He always wanted to check in, see how things were going, give me advice on fishing and on the job that I had. And he was a pretty nice guy, pretty special guy, and I always considered that relationship to be interesting. And I always felt lucky that he would kind of check in on me periodically. So this thing I call Coleman's Law is an adage that he wrote in one of his stories, and it basically said, if you knew that your next cast would land in front of a 60-pounder, would you change anything? And then he went on to say, if your answer is yes, then you're really not ready. And that really stuck with me. It was something that I really believe, for one thing, and it's just sort of embodied so many of the things that I consider to be so important as a surf fisherman. So what he's saying, or at least what I've taken from it, is that there are countless variables that go into hunting a big fish in the surf, or even just surf fishing in general. And there's only a small number of variables that we can control. So if you're not doing what needs to be done, and when I say that I mean if you're not doing the things, those handful of things, if you're not making sure that they are all checked off and that you are completely 100% confident in those things, then first of all, you're setting yourself up to be exploited. You're setting yourself up to neglect something, get that fish after putting in all this effort, hook up to this really good fish, it's the one, and then it's gone because you didn't check your leader, or because your hooks were dull and rusty, or because the plug you were using, you've already caught 7 good fish on it, and and the split ring was ovaled out, and the split ring gave way, or you tied a crappy knot, or whatever it is. So basically, this is sort of, I guess, lesson 1. The way that I would look at the order of importance with things that you have to do to ensure that when that hit comes, that you're as ready as you can be, because there's 1,000 other variables that you cannot control. These things that he brings up, this adage that he sort of adhered to, and that I have adhered to since reading it, this was born at Block Island in the 1980s. This was, Tim landed, I don't even know, I think he had 4 50s and a 67-pounder during those banner years at Block Island from about 1980 to about 1989, give or take. And they learned, him and his surfcasting crew, or whatever you want to call them, they learned through really, the school of hard knocks, as they say. They learned that these fish were big enough, bad enough, strong enough that they would find and exploit anything that they left unchecked. So the things that you can control, obviously, are the condition of your gear. So if things aren't in perfect working order, you need to take care of that. Your line. If your spool's getting low, or if you're looking at the line going, man, this looks a little suspect, that needs to be changed. If you're really serious about trying to catch that impressive fish, that hit that number that you've always wanted to hit, these are the things you can control. These are things that are very important to get them done. Another thing, your leader. If you're going on, 30 casts, 40 casts, and you haven't checked your leader, your skin should be crawling. And if you've gone multiple trips with the same leader, I mean, you should be practically in need of therapy at that point. That feeling you get when you get down to, you do all the stuff you got to do, you're trying to get away from the car, you're parked in a spot where you're not really supposed to be parked, you get down to the water, everything's fine, you start casting, you start thinking, you're going through that mental checklist in your head. Where did I put my phone? Okay, that's right, I stuck it under my seat. Did I get my pliers? Yeah, I got my pliers. The camera, okay, I'm good there. And then, oh shit, did I lock the car? And then that little needling feeling just sticks with you for the entire trip, and you really can't concentrate anymore because you're wondering, did I lock the car? I have all this stuff in there. Where did I put the keys? Is everything in where it should be? That's the kind of feeling you should be having if you're neglecting your gear. If your leader is old and chafed, or any of these things should be just hammering your head like an anvil. That should be something that you just never neglect. A few other things that are really important to check are the condition of your plugs. Like if you're getting fish on a Danny plug night after night, I can remember about 6 or 7 years ago we got into a really good bite of fish on Danny's, and I didn't think to check my swivels, and luckily I didn't have a failure. But one night I was getting ready to go again, and I was just going through the bag checking my hooks, because that is something that I do and did always do. Check the hooks, make sure they're not rusty, make sure they're not dull, make sure they're not bent out, change any one that you got. And I'm changing out the hooks on this herring Danny, Beachmaster herring Danny, and the swivels were just stretched out. And all of a sudden the light went off in my head. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is something that needs to be changed immediately. I rewired the plug on the spot. So these are things that are often ignored, and you might never even notice that. Hook up to that good fish, and then the thing comes off. You come in, the swivel's been broken, and you just say, oh man, that was a giant. When in actuality, if you had just looked at that thing, you would have landed the fish. So, like I said, there's a million variables that you can't control. And then there's this small handful that you can, and that's where you have to start. If you're serious about trying to get a big fish in the surf, you've got to start there. Remember what Tim Coleman said. If your next cast was going to land in front of a 60-pounder and you knew that, would you change anything? You need to ask yourself that every night before you start.